Amaka watched as her mother packed the last of her things. Every item was carefully folded and placed in the bag, but the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Her mother's movements were quiet, purposeful, yet there was something in her eyes that made Amaka's heart beat faster. "You'll be fine, Amaka," her mother said, her voice soft but firm. "Trust me, this is for your future." Amaka nodded, though a knot tightened in her stomach. She felt both excited about the journey ahead and uneasy about the change. Everything was happening so quickly. Her mother paused, folding a piece of cloth, and looked at her daughter with a blend of love and concern. "Be obedient to your uncle," she said, her voice steady but serious. "He's a good man. Everything will be fine." Amaka swallowed hard. She wanted to believe her mother, but something about the words didn't sit right. There was a warning in them, a quiet tension that hung between them. She nodded but didn't speak. As her mother continued packing, Amaka stared out the window, her mind spinning. The excitement of the city, the promises of a new life, all felt distant. There was a tightening in her chest, a sense that something was wrong, but she couldn't quite place it. "I don't know, Mama," Amaka whispered, more to herself than to her mother. "It all feels strange." Her mother didn't hear her, busy with the last few items. But the words lingered in the air, unanswered. Amaka closed her eyes for a moment, wishing the feeling away, but it only grew stronger. Later that night, her mother held her close before she fell asleep. The warmth of her embrace, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, made Amaka feel safe. "I trust you'll be good, my daughter," her mother whispered, her voice thick with both hope and sorrow. The weight of her mother's love was heavy, but there was something else, something Amaka couldn't name, pressing against her chest. The next morning, Amaka stood by the door, watching as her uncle's black car rolled into the compound. The sun gleamed off the sleek surface, making it look like a chariot of some sort, carrying promises of a better life. Her uncle stepped out of the car with a broad smile, his eyes sparkling with kindness. He waved to her, his presence commanding, yet gentle. "Welcome to the city, Amaka," he said, his voice smooth. "You'll love it here." Amaka felt a flutter in her stomach. The excitement that had been growing inside her now fought against the unease that lingered like a shadow. She was about to leave her village, her home, and step into the unknown. She smiled, masking her uncertainty, and took a step toward her new life. As she climbed into the car with her bags, the city ahead seemed so big, so full of life. Her uncle's words echoed in her mind. "The city is full of possibilities, Amaka. You'll see." She glanced back one last time at the village, the place that had shaped her into who she was. It felt like a goodbye, not just to the place, but to a part of herself. The road ahead was unknown, the city full of promises, yet the feeling of change was thick in the air, and though her heart was eager to begin, there was a whisper of fear that clung to her, quietly tugging at her thoughts. Amaka sat in the car, her eyes wide as the world outside passed by in a blur. The city was a sight to behold, tall buildings reaching towards the sky, busy streets filled with people hustling in every direction. She had never seen anything like it before. Her heart raced with both excitement and fear, the promise of a new life tugging at her while uncertainty whispered in the back of her mind. "Wow, the city is huge," she exclaimed, her voice full of wonder. "You'll get used to it," came the calm response. "This place is full of chances for those who work hard." Amaka nodded, still taking in everything around her. The city seemed alive, buzzing with energy, as if it had secrets waiting to be uncovered. She couldn't help but feel both small and important all at once, caught between the possibilities of the city and the worry growing inside her. Eventually, the car slowed and stopped. They had arrived at their destination. Amaka's eyes grew even wider as she gazed at the towering gates of the mansion. The place looked like something out of a dream, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. The grand house seemed to stretch endlessly, each corner bigger than the next. Amaka couldn't believe this was where she would be staying. "Welcome home," the voice was warm, inviting. The large gates opened, and Amaka stepped out of the car. She was overwhelmed, caught between disbelief and excitement. She followed her uncle through the house, trying to mask her excitement, but her eyes betrayed her. Every room she entered felt like a new world, marble floors that sparkled underfoot, walls lined with treasures she couldn't have imagined. "This place is full of opportunities for someone like you," her uncle said, his voice filled with pride. Amaka couldn't find the words to respond. "I never imagined a house like this," she finally whispered. It was too much to take in at once. The house was more than just big, it was vast, like a palace, with rooms so grand she felt like a visitor rather than a resident as they walked. Through the house, her uncle casually mentioned that his wife, Amaka's aunt, was always away for work. Amaka would be spending most of her time alone with him. "Your aunt's always away on business," he explained. "It's just us here most of the time." The words didn't sit right with Amaka. She wasn't sure why, but something about being alone with him made her uneasy. Still, she said nothing, trying to push the thought away. It was just the newness of everything, she told herself. She'd get used to it, but as the days passed, Amaka began to notice small changes in her uncle's behavior. At first, he asked her for help with simple tasks, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, the calls to his room became more frequent. "Come here, Amaka. I need you to help me with something," he'd say, his voice calm but with a hint of something else she couldn't place. Amaka didn't understand. Why did he keep calling her? It seemed like the tasks were simple enough, but something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, made her feel uneasy. Every time she went to him, a knot tightened in her stomach. One evening, as Amaka sat on the couch, her uncle placed his hand on her shoulder, a touch that was too familiar, too intimate. Amaka stiffened, the warmth of his hand feeling like fire on her skin. "You're growing up to be a beautiful young woman," he said, his voice soft. Amaka pulled away slightly, unsure of how to react. She had never been spoken to like this before. Her heart raced, and she didn't know if she should say something, but the words caught in her throat. She had been taught to respect her elders, to obey. But this was different. This didn't feel right. As the days passed, Amaka noticed that her uncle's glances lingered longer than they should, his smiles becoming more unsettling each time they met. The tension in the house built, like a storm on the horizon, and Amaka felt it with every breath she took. She began to avoid him as much as possible, retreating into the corners of the house, staying in her room, trying to ignore the growing discomfort inside her. Her heart raced when he called her again. She didn't know what to expect anymore. But something told her that she couldn't just keep quiet. Something told her that this wasn't just a phase, and the silence between them was becoming unbearable. African tales have long taught us the value of listening to our instincts, and Amaka's instincts were screaming at her to pay attention. This was not how things were supposed to be, but she stayed silent, unsure of how to confront the growing unease within her. The tension built, and it seemed to fill every corner of the house. Amaka knew something had to change, but for now, she could only hold her breath, waiting for what would happen next. As the days passed, Amaka began to notice her uncle's presence becoming more intrusive. At first, it was just a slight touch, a hand brushing her arm, fingers lingering on her skin. It was nothing she could easily explain, but it made her uncomfortable. Every time he was near, the space seemed to shrink. "Come here, Amaka," he would say, his voice calm, yet there was an edge to it that made her feel trapped. She didn't know how to react. Her body stiffened every time he came too close, but she didn't know how to escape. His actions seemed harmless at first, but she could feel something darker hiding beneath his kindness. One afternoon, her uncle called to her from his room. "Amaka, come here. I need you to help me with something." The words didn't feel right. Amaka hesitated. At the door, a wave of discomfort washing over her. Something told her not to go, but she followed anyway, trying to shake the feeling that crawled up her spine. Inside, she found her uncle watching a video on the screen. The images were unfamiliar, strange, and uncomfortable for her to look at. "What's this, uncle?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nothing, Amaka," he answered casually. "Just for grown-ups. Go get me a glass of water." The unease in her chest grew heavier, but she did as he asked, her hands trembling as she filled the glass. There was something in the air, something wrong, but Amaka couldn't put her finger on it. When she returned, she noticed the door click shut behind her. And the sound of the lock turning echoed in her ears. Why is he locking the door? She thought to herself. Her discomfort grew into fear. Something was changing in the room. She was no longer in control of the situation, turning toward her. Her uncle flashed a cold smile. Amaka, I want you to give me something. Amaka froze. The words didn't make sense. What did he mean? She took a step back, her heart racing. She tried to speak, but all she could manage was, "What do you mean, uncle?" His eyes darkened. "Something my wife never gives me. You understand, don't you, Amaka?" Her stomach churned as the room seemed to shrink around her. The air was thick, suffocating. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her mother's words echoed in her mind. Be obedient to your uncle. But this wasn't obedience. This wasn't right. Uncle Johnson took a step closer, his hands reaching for her shoulders. I don't want this, Amaka whispered, her voice trembling with fear, but he didn't listen. His hands moved in ways they shouldn't. His touch crossed a line she couldn't ignore. Stop, she cried, pushing him away with all the strength she had left. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she realized what her uncle truly intended. The weight of his actions sank into her like a cold, sharp stone. Uncle Johnson's face darkened with anger. You will do as I say, Amaka. Your mother trusts me. Obey me, and nothing bad will happen. Amaka's legs shook. She felt paralyzed, trapped between his threats and her growing sense of danger. Fear and guilt twisted inside her. Her mother had told her to listen to her uncle, to trust him. But how could she now? In a burst of desperation, Amaka shoved past him and ran out of the room, her heart hammering in her chest. Her mind raced, not knowing where to go or who to turn to, but the need to escape was stronger than anything else. I need to get away, she thought. I don't know who to trust, but I can't stay here. The world seemed like it was spinning as she fled, overwhelmed by the urgency to put as much distance as possible between herself and the danger she had just narrowly escaped. Amaka spent the next few days in a prison of her own fear. She stayed locked in her room, hoping that the walls would protect her from the discomfort that lingered in every corner of the house. She avoided him as best she could, but his presence haunted her, every room feeling too small, every step too close. She couldn't escape the tension that filled the air, the weight of his unsettling behavior pressing against her chest. I can't be around him anymore, she thought to herself. He's too close, too dangerous. The days dragged on, and with each passing hour, the unease in Amaka's heart grew. She knew that things were not right, but she felt trapped, uncertain of what to do next. Every time she heard his footsteps, her heart would race, and every time he called, she would hesitate, unsure of how to respond. Then, one evening, everything changed. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke through the stillness of the house. Amaka's heart skipped a beat. She rushed to the window, her eyes wide with hope. There, in the distance, she saw the familiar shape of her aunt's car. It's her. I'm not alone anymore, Amaka whispered to herself, her voice trembling. With relief, without a second thought, Amaka rushed downstairs. Her feet barely touched the ground as she ran toward the door, tears already starting to fall. She didn't know what to say, but she knew she needed help. She couldn't carry this burden alone any longer. Aunt, you have to help me. Amaka cried, her voice filled with desperation. Her aunt, startled by the sudden outburst, immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. She pulled Amaka into her arms, her heart racing with concern. Tell me what happened, my dear, her aunt said, her voice gentle but firm. Amaka took a deep breath, gathering the courage to speak. He's been touching me, aunt. I don't know what to do. The words spilled out, raw and painful, and with them, all the fear and confusion that had been building inside her. Her aunt's face went pale, the weight of the truth sinking in. The horror in her eyes mirrored Amaka's own fear. Where is he, Amaka? Her aunt demanded, her shock quickly turning into determination. We need to confront him now. Still trembling, Amaka led her aunt toward Uncle Johnson's bedroom. Each step felt like a weight, but Amaka knew there was no turning back. The time had come to face the truth. The door creaked open, and there he was, sitting on the bed, his eyes wide in surprise when he saw his wife. His face immediately fell, and a false smile crossed his lips. "It's nothing, dear," he said quickly, trying to brush off the tension in the air. "Don't worry about it." But his words rang hollow. His attempt to cover up his guilt was transparent, and Amaka's aunt saw through it instantly. The anger and betrayal in her heart flared to life, and with a voice that shook with fury and disbelief, she spoke. "You're sick, Johnson," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. Tears began to fall from her eyes as the truth became undeniable. Her husband, the man she had trusted, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. The pain in her chest was almost too much to bear. Amaka stood beside her, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow, knowing that her aunt's realization would change everything. The truth had come to light, and the weight of it settled in the room like a storm, leaving nothing untouched. Without wasting any time, Amaka's aunt took swift action. She held Amaka's trembling hand and said, "We're going to make sure he pays for what he's done." Amaka felt a wave of relief wash over her as her aunt's strength anchored her. Despite the comfort of her aunt's words, the weight of everything that had happened was still heavy on Amaka's heart, and the fear lingered. They didn't wait another moment. They went straight to the police. Amaka walked beside her aunt, still shaken, but with a new sense of resolve stirring inside her. The world felt different now, like something had changed. No longer was she just the frightened girl trapped in the silence of her uncle's house. Now, she was a voice calling out for justice. Uncle Johnson's time had come. When the police arrived, they didn't hesitate. They surrounded him with swift, quiet certainty. "You are under arrest for your actions," one officer said firmly. "You will face the consequences." Amaka's heart pounded, but this time, it was a feeling of release. The city, which once seemed so vast and full of uncertainty, now felt like a place where justice could be found. The towering buildings around her no longer seemed so imposing, they felt like witnesses to the change that had just begun. Her uncle's arrest was the first step toward healing. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in Amaka's life, one where she would no longer hide in fear. Amaka was placed in her aunt's care. The house felt different, safer. Her aunt spoke softly, her voice full of warmth and strength. "You're safe now, Amaka. No one will hurt you again." Amaka wanted to believe her. She wanted to feel secure, but the journey ahead was uncertain, and the past still clung to her heart. The legal process, however, was slow. Each day felt like it dragged on, but Amaka took comfort in knowing that her uncle would never hurt her again. Every time she felt the weight of the past creeping back into her thoughts, her aunt reminded her, "It will take time, but justice will be served." Amaka worked on healing, though it wasn't easy. She didn't have all the answers, but with her aunt by her side, she found the courage to talk about what had happened. Slowly, she began to understand that speaking out was not weakness, it was strength. She spoke with counselors who guided her, their words a balm to the scars she carried. "You are strong, Amaka," they told her. "You took the first step by speaking out." Slowly, the darkness that had held her in its grip began to loosen. She was learning to trust herself again, learning to reclaim the parts of her that had been stolen by fear. As the days passed, Amaka learned to trust her instincts. She could no longer stay silent. No longer would she shrink into the shadows, afraid to speak. She had found her voice. "I won't be silent anymore," she said one day, her voice steady and sure. "I know my worth." Though the road ahead was still unknown, Amaka was no longer the frightened girl she had once been. She was stronger now, and no matter what came next, she would face it with courage, knowing that her voice mattered. Fear had wrapped itself tightly around Amaka's heart, but now something inside her was changing. The weight of silence had kept her bound for too long, but she was beginning to understand the power of speaking out. She no longer wanted to stay in the shadows, silent and fearful. "I won't stay silent anymore," she whispered, a spark of determination lighting in her eyes. "I have to speak for myself." It wasn't easy. Every word seemed like a mountain to climb, each step filled with the tremor of fear. But with each breath, she pushed herself forward. "I I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice trembling, almost as if the words themselves feared to be spoken, but as time passed, she found strength in her voice. Slowly, the tremble faded. The words, once difficult to utter, began to flow with power. Amaka could feel her confidence growing. Each moment of speaking out, though hard, was building her courage, and with that courage, she grew stronger. Amaka thought back to the dark moments she had endured, the times when silence seemed like the only option, the times when she felt small and afraid. But the more she reflected, the more she realized that justice had to be fought for, no matter the fear. I can't let this happen to me or anyone else, she declared, her resolve firm. The darkness that once clouded her vision began to clear, replaced by the light of hope. The thought of justice became the fuel that kept her moving forward. Her voice had power, and with it, she could make a difference. As her courage blossomed, Amaka saw something she had never seen before, the possibility of justice, even in the darkest moments. There was hope, even when the road seemed uncertain. There is hope for us, she said with a newfound strength. We can fight for what's right. Her heart swelled as she realized that her story mattered. Her words would inspire others, urging them to speak up too, and so, Amaka's journey became a testament to the power of standing up, the importance of one's voice, and the strength found in truth. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. That even in the darkest of times, your voice matters. Never let fear silence you. In the end, Amaka had become a symbol of hope, of courage, and of the power of speaking out. It was a lesson shared across the land, a lesson that everyone's voice is powerful and deserving of being heard.